Now that you've gotten a little more familiar with how Bash works, it's time to learn how to write your own Bash scripts. At the end of the day, a script is really nothing more than a set of commands that you want to use to accomplish something more than once. What you may or may not have known before this point is that Bash is actually a fully fledged programming language. It is surely not the prettiest language out there, and it might be a little slow and a little intimidating at first, but it does have everything you'd expect, like conditionals and loops. All that being said, it can be an extremely powerful language if you're very familiar with all the commands that we've learned so far. Alright, so to make our first script, all we need to do is make a new file, and usually we end Bash scripts with the .sh extension. So I'll go ahead and do vi and script.sh. So when it comes to Bash scripting, it's really kind of pulling together a few things that we've already learned and mixing it with constructs that we know from other languages. Let's start by making a few variables. We'll make one called a that's equal to 10, and then b that's equal to 2. And as you can see, both are capitalized, and neither has any spaces between the characters. The capitalization is actually a common convention, but the lack of spaces is required. Next, let's make some string variables. We'll say this one is c, and set it equal to a string. Now, when we use double quotes, we can actually interpolate other variables. So in this instance, we'll do this is interpolation, and say a equals, and then if you want to use a variable, use the $sign character, followed by the variable name. And then conversely, if we do d equals something in single quotes, this will not allow interpolation. So we can say this is not, and say b does not equal $b. And then just to test things out, we can come down and do an echo C, and echo D. And then to try this out, just go back to the command line. And to run our shell script, we can use the sh command. So we do sh, and then script.shell. And like we expect, the first string prints out a equals 10, and the second one just says b is not equal to $b. Alright, now that we understand variables, we can move on to tests. And a test is basically a thing that evaluates to true or false. To write a test, you use the left and right square brackets. From the command line, let's go ahead and just make a new variable called e. We'll say e equals 4. And let's just write a test, and the test will say e is greater than 2. So we use the left square bracket, and we say $e, and to do greater than, we can do -gt. You can kind of think of this as like a flag for the test. And then we say 2. And then finally we close with a right square bracket and hit enter. And as you see, nothing was actually printed out, but this does evaluate to some error code. If you want to see the last error code, you can say echo and then $?. And in this case, we have a 0. And in Bash scripting, 0 is actually the return code for success. Anything else means a failure. So in this case, we know that e is in fact greater than 2. The kind of weird thing about Bash is that there's the single bracket version that we just saw, and then you can do the same thing with a double bracket version. So we can say bracket bracket, and then echo that, and this does essentially the same thing. The difference is that the double bracket version is actually a construct built into the language. You can think of it as an improvement over the single bracket version. It does some things like guard against empty strings for you, and basically you should try to favor it if you can, unless there's some reason you really need to use the single bracket version. Now that we've learned about tests, we can go ahead and use them along with ifs in our script. Go ahead and go back into the script real quick. And then to use them, it's pretty straightforward. You can just go ahead and say if, and then add a test. So in this case, let's make the first if check to see if a certain file exists. We'll say bracket bracket, and then we'll say -e. This stands for exists. And then we just give it the file name, so we can say catable. So this will return a 0 code if the file catable exists. If statements are then followed by the then keyword, and then a body. So we can actually catable if it exists. And then if we want to follow this up with an else if, we actually type elif. Then we can follow that up with our second conditional. This time, let's go ahead and compare b to a. We'll say, if b is greater than a, then we'll just echo, at least b is greater than a. And then we can finish things off with an else statement. When we use else, we do spell it normally, and we don't have to follow it with a then statement. Instead, we can just print that all tests have failed. And to end the if statement, we use if but backwards, so fi. And this is actually pretty common. A few other ones like case statements do this too. But anyway, once you're done, go ahead and exit back to the shell. And then we can run the script one last time. And as we can see, both of our tests failed, so it fell through to the else statement and printed all tests have failed.